When I say I failed 1,000 times, I don't mean it dramatically. I don't mean big cinematic failures. I mean the small ones, the quiet ones, the ones no one remembers, except you. Failure wasn't something that happened sometimes, it was the routine. I failed so often that success felt unfamiliar. I failed in ways that didn't deserve sympathy. No big collapse, no public embarrassment, just effort that didn't turn into results, again and again. At first, every failure hurt. It made me question my ability, my judgment, my direction. I would replay mistakes in my head and wonder what I was missing that everyone else seemed to understand. But when failure keeps repeating, something strange happens. You stop being surprised. After a while, I stopped reacting emotionally. Not because I stopped caring, but because reacting every time was exhausting. I couldn't afford to fall apart 1,000 times, so I adapted. I started counting failures instead of wins. Not literally, but mentally. Each attempt that didn't work became part of the pattern, and once you see the pattern, fear starts losing its grip. Fear needs unpredictability to survive. When failure becomes predictable, fear has nothing to work with. I failed when I tried something new. I failed when I tried again. I failed when I adjusted and tried differently, and life didn't end. That realization sounds simple, but it changes everything. Most people stop after a few failures because they think failure is a signal, a warning, a sign that they should turn back. I failed so many times that I realized something different. Failure isn't a signal to stop. It's just part of staying. I didn't fail because I was incapable. I failed because I was still experimenting, and experimentation looks messy. There were moments I felt embarrassed by how often I failed, not in front of others, but internally. I wondered how long I could keep doing this without feeling foolish, but quitting wouldn't erase the failures. It would just make them permanent. So I stayed, not confidently, not optimistically, just stubbornly. Failure stopped being something I reacted to and became something I expected. An expectation removes shock. I didn't wake up hoping to fail. I woke up prepared for it. And that preparation mattered because when failure is expected, you don't panic. You don't overthink. You don't personalize it. You look at it, adjust, and move on. That's not talent. That's tolerance. I built tolerance the hard way. Every failed attempt added a layer of resilience, a layer of detachment, a layer of realism. I stopped believing that effort should immediately reward me. Effort doesn't owe you anything. That's a harsh lesson, but an honest one. I learned that progress doesn't announce itself early. It hides behind repetition. It hides behind mistakes. It hides behind outcomes that look identical even when you're improving. From the outside, it looked like nothing was changing. Inside, everything was. I was learning how to stand back up without drama, how to restart without motivation, how to continue without reassurance. Those skills don't come from success. They come from failing a lot. By the time I reached what felt like my 100th failure, something important had already happened. I was no longer afraid of failing again. And once fear leaves, effort becomes easier to sustain. That's when I realized why failing 1,000 times mattered. Not because it made me special, but because it trained me to stay. And staying long enough is the only thing failure can't beat. There comes a point when failure doesn't hurt the way it used to. Not because it becomes easy, but because you've felt it so many times that your mind stops reacting emotionally. The sharp edge dulls, the panic fades, and what's left is clarity. At first, every failure felt personal, like a message about who I was and what I deserved. I treated each one like a verdict instead of a lesson. But after failing again and again and again, something shifted. I stopped asking, "What's wrong with me?" and started asking, "What's wrong with this approach?" That small change mattered more than I realized at the time. Failure stopped being an identity issue and became a process issue. My ego slowly stepped out of the way. When you fail 1,000 times, ego doesn't survive. You can't protect your image forever. You can't keep pretending everything is fine. You either learn or you leave, and I stayed. I noticed patterns I couldn't see before, the same mistakes showing up in different forms, the same shortcuts tempting me again and again, the same places where I avoided effort instead of improving skill. Failure was pointing things out, calmly, consistently, as long as I was willing to look. Most people fail too few times to learn properly. They feel the pain once or twice and stop before failure has a chance to explain itself. But failure only teaches through repetition. I failed enough times to listen. I learned where I rushed, where I relied on hope instead of structure, where I confused effort with effectiveness. And the more I learned, the less emotional failure became, not meaningless, informative. I stopped dramatizing setbacks. I stopped needing time to recover emotionally. I didn't spiral after things didn't work. I adjusted. That's when things started moving faster. Not on the outside, but internally. I became calmer under pressure. I didn't overreact to rejection. I didn't celebrate small wins too loudly either. Everything evened out. Failure had trained my nervous system. I was no longer operating from fear. I was operating from familiarity, and familiarity breeds competence. I also noticed how different my reaction was compared to others. People around me still panicked at setbacks, still questioned everything after one bad outcome, still needed reassurance to continue. I didn't judge them. I understood them. They hadn't failed enough yet. Failure builds tolerance before it builds results, and tolerance is what allows learning to compound. Every time something didn't work, I didn't reset emotionally. I reset strategically. I didn't need to convince myself to try again. Trying again had become automatic. That's a dangerous place, in the best way. Because once failure stops hurting, you stop avoiding it. And once you stop avoiding failure, improvement speeds up. I wasn't fearless. I was informed. I knew what failure felt like, how long it lasted, and what it required from me afterward. There was nothing left to imagine or exaggerate. Reality is always less scary than anticipation. Failure had shown me that the worst thing wasn't failing. It was reacting badly to failure. So I stopped reacting. I treated each failure like a checkpoint instead of a wall, something to acknowledge, learn from, and move past. That mindset didn't make me successful overnight, but it made me stable. And stability is rare. Most people quit because failure shakes them emotionally. It disrupts their sense of self. It makes them question their place. Failure didn't do that to me anymore. It just taught. And when failure becomes a teacher instead of a threat, you stop fighting it. You use it. And that's when failing 1,000 times starts making sense. Because each one took something away, fear, ego, hesitation, until only focus remained. I used to think people quit because they failed too much. I was wrong. Most people quit because they failed too little. They don't stay long enough for failure to do its job. I watched it happen again and again. Someone would try, fail once or twice, feel embarrassed, and quietly move on. They'd say it wasn't meant for them, that they were being realistic, that they had better options, and maybe they did. But what I noticed was this: they never gave failure enough time to teach them anything. Failure doesn't explain itself immediately. It repeats, it tests, it waits to see if you'll stay. Most people leave before that conversation even begins. They treat early failure like a final answer instead of the beginning of a process, and because of that, they never build tolerance. I had failed so many times that failure didn't scare me anymore. But for people who fail rarely, each failure feels huge. It shakes them. It makes them question everything. I understood them. If I had failed only a few times, I might have quit too. But I stayed long enough to see something clearly. Failure isn't there to stop you. It's there to filter you. It filters out people who need reassurance early, people who want success to feel good immediately, people who confuse discomfort with impossibility. That filtering happens quietly. The room slowly empties. Fewer people trying, fewer voices competing, fewer distractions. Not because the path is impossible, but because persistence is rare. I didn't feel special watching this happen. I felt lonely, because staying means watching people leave, watching peers move on, watching conversations change, watching the excitement fade. It gets quiet, and quiet makes doubt louder. But it also creates space, space to focus, space to improve, space to fail without comparison. I wasn't trying to outwork anyone. I was outlasting them. And outlasting doesn't look impressive at first. It looks slow, it looks repetitive, it looks unnecessary, until suddenly it's not, because when most people leave, progress accelerates, not because you became better overnight, but because you're no longer restarting emotionally. People who quit early keep resetting their confidence. They keep starting from zero, emotionally and mentally, every time they try something new. I didn't reset. I stacked failures. Each one built on the last. Each one removed another layer of fear. Each one taught me something specific. That stacking effect is powerful. Failure only compounds if you stay. Most people never experience that compounding because they don't stay long enough. They fail once, retreat, recover, try something else, fail again, and repeat the cycle. Their effort is spread thin. Their learning resets. I concentrated mine. I failed in the same direction long enough for failure to start making sense. That's when I realized why failing 1,000 times mattered. It wasn't about pain tolerance. It was about staying in the same place long enough to understand it. Failure isn't useful if it's random. It's useful when it's repeated in the same context. That repetition sharpens instincts. It teaches nuance. It builds judgment. People who quit early never get that far. They protect themselves from pain, but also from mastery. I wasn't braver than them. I was just willing to stay uncomfortable longer. And that willingness changed everything, because once failure finishes filtering people out, it leaves behind something valuable, a clear path, a quieter space, and someone who knows how to move through it. That's when failing 1,000 times stops looking like a mistake. It starts looking like preparation. Success teaches very little when it comes early. Failure teaches everything, but only if you stay. By the time I had failed hundreds of times, something important had changed inside me. Not my results, not my circumstances, my reactions. Failure no longer shocked me. Rejection no longer derailed me. Setbacks no longer felt personal. That didn't make me confident. It made me steady, and steadiness is rare. I noticed that I recovered faster than before. Where I once needed days to emotionally process a setback, now I needed minutes, sometimes seconds. I'd acknowledge what went wrong, make a small adjustment, and move on. No drama, no spiraling, no self-blame. Failure had trained my nervous system. It taught me how to stay calm when things didn't work, how to think instead of panic, how to separate identity from outcome. Those skills don't come from winning, they come from losing, repeatedly. I also stopped relying on motivation. Motivation disappears when you fail often. It can't survive that environment, so something else takes its place: discipline. I didn't wait to feel inspired. I didn't need emotional permission to work. I showed up because showing up had become automatic. That's a dangerous advantage, because once effort becomes routine, progress doesn't depend on mood. Failure forced me to simplify. I stopped chasing big moments. I stopped expecting breakthroughs. I focused on small improvements, things I could control. One adjustment at a time, one correction at a time, one attempt at a time. That mindset compounds quietly. I started noticing that my decision-making improved. I could sense problems earlier. I could predict where things might break. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was recognizing patterns. That's experience. And experience is built on mistakes, not success. Success hides weaknesses. Failure exposes them. Failure forced me to confront things I avoided before: gaps in skill, weak systems, unrealistic expectations. I couldn't ignore them anymore, and fixing those things made me stronger than success ever could have. I became emotionally numb to rejection, not in a negative way, but in a functional one. I didn't flinch at no. I didn't overvalue approval. I didn't need external validation to continue. That emotional independence is powerful. It means your progress doesn't slow down when feedback disappears. It means you don't collapse when results fluctuate. It means you're stable. And stability is what allows consistency to actually work. Eventually, small progress started showing up. Nothing dramatic, nothing viral, just enough to confirm that the adjustments mattered. I didn't celebrate much, because failure had already taught me that early celebration can be misleading. I stayed focused. I stayed patient. I understood now that progress doesn't arrive as a reward. It arrives as a byproduct of staying long enough, of failing intelligently, of learning instead of reacting. I realized something clearly during this phase. Success didn't make me capable. Failure did. Success didn't teach me patience. Failure did. Success didn't train resilience. Failure did. By the time things started improving consistently, failure had already done its work. It had stripped away ego, fear, and hesitation. What remained was focus. I wasn't fearless. I was prepared to adjust, prepared to restart, prepared to keep going without emotional noise. That's what failure built, something success never could. And once you have that foundation, results become less fragile. They last longer. They don't disappear the moment conditions change. Failure didn't slow me down in the long run. It strengthened the structure that progress needed to stand on. And that's when I understood why failing 1,000 times wasn't a tragedy. It was training. If you're tired of failing, I want you to hear this without any hype. You're not broken, you're not behind, and you're not wasting your time. You're just early, and you're staying. Most people don't quit because they fail once. They quit because they fail a few times and decide that pain means they're not meant for this. But failure isn't a verdict, it's a requirement. Every path that leads somewhere real demands payment up front. That payment isn't money or talent, it's failure. And the more meaningful the path, the higher the cost. I failed 1,000 times, not because I was unlucky, but because I stayed in the process long enough to experience all the wrong ways before the right ones showed up. That's not weakness, that's commitment. If I could speak to my younger self, the version of me who was exhausted, embarrassed, and questioning everything, I wouldn't tell them to be positive. I'd tell them this: fail again, just don't leave. Because leaving is the only way failure wins. Failing teaches you what to adjust. Staying gives those lessons time to work. People who fail less aren't stronger, they're just gone earlier. They never let failure finish its job. And here's the part most people miss. You don't need confidence to keep going. You don't need motivation. You don't need belief. You need repetition. Repetition turns chaos into structure. Repetition turns mistakes into patterns. Repetition turns fear into familiarity. Failing 1,000 times didn't make me special. It made me stable. Stable enough to keep going when results were inconsistent. Stable enough to handle progress without panicking. Stable enough to rebuild when things didn't work. That stability is rare, and it only comes from staying longer than your fear. If you're watching this and thinking about quitting because you're tired of failing, ask yourself one honest question: am I failing or am I learning? Because if you're still adjusting, still trying, still refining, you're not stuck. You're in training. No one applauds training, no one sees it, no one celebrates it, but it's the part that makes everything else possible. One day people will see the result and assume it was easy. They'll see the outcome and skip the 1,000 failures that came before it. Let them. You'll know what it took. And that's enough. Failure didn't stop me. It prepared me. And if you're still here, still trying, still standing, still failing forward, it's doing the same for you. Stay. That's the only rule.